Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the frozen food section of Christ Church.
The what section?
The frozen food section. It's like everybody left. Well, you're from Canada. You don't count.
You call this frozen? Give me a break.
I'm glad you all could make it. And today we're going to kind of shift gears. So we're going to shift away from all of the ancient stuff, and we'll move to just the ancient stuff. So, baby steps. So we're going to put aside, we talked about Canaanite or Israelite origins, and that Israelites are kind of conglomeration, mostly probably Canaanites, but with some other, mixtures of peoples who kind of came in and they kind of melded into a cohesive group in the 1200 BCE time frame, kind of that late Bronze Age collapse. And so today I'm going to skip over the book of Judges because the book of Judges is really interesting. If you've never read the book of Judges, you should read it. There's it's a fun book to read because it's just like a bunch of stories about stuff, and you're like, how did that happen? Samson and Delilah is in the book of Judges, and Deborah and Barak, and there's just all these great stories. So, but from a historical standpoint, other than the fact that all of these tribes are kind of just individual tribes doing their own thing, there's not a lot of historicity in there. So we want to jump forward, and we want to talk about the monarchy. So just a quick reminder. So, nobody really knows when Israel started as a nation. The first marker we have was in 1200 BCE, so 200 years before the time of the monarchy. And we don't know how long before that things had been developing, but the Pharaoh Merneptah came in and recorded that there was he had defeated, kind of as an afterthought, he had defeated Israel and wiped them out. So for at least 200 years, if not more, it was kind of like the book of Judges. There was this loose confederation of tribes. Every once in a while, there'd be some kind of threat that they would face. Somebody's invading, something going on, and a leader would rise up, deal with the issue, and then they'd go back to their kind of loose confederation. So we're going to start here with Saul and work our way. And we think of the time of the kings of Israel as this long period. It was only less than about 300 years until the northern kingdom was destroyed, and then maybe another 100 to 150 years before Judah was wiped out. And then after that, they were always under they had a nation, after the exile, but it were under some kind of other imperial control. So they were only kind of this independent monarchy for about 300 to 400 years in the early Iron Age. So,
I love putting this in perspective. So,
yeah.
U.S. is 250 years old.
Yeah.
Old, right?
Yeah.
It only lasted 300 years.
300 years, right. So, I mean, and when
that part of the world, 250 years is called a rounding error.
I am, some of these empires, you think about the Roman Empire, which lasted 1,500 years if you count the Byzantine Empire as part of that, but even, ancient Greece, it was an empire for 100, 200 years. There seems to be kind of a time capsule for empire, that you get to 200 or 300 years and then things seem to kind of fall apart for whatever, and a variety of different reasons. But so today we're going to talk about Saul and start a little bit with David. So how much archaeological evidence do we have for Saul? Guesses?
Zero.
Zero. Oh, where's my click? Zero. There is no archaeology. There is no outside the Bible documents until you get to the stories that are in the Hebrew Bible. So if you remember from the timeline, the Bible was written started getting written in this time, and we really see the Bible in the form, the Old Testament, in the form we see today around 500 BCE. There's nothing before that talks about Saul. So that's Saul. What's your guesses on David? Yes?
I would think so.
Yes.
Think so?
I would think. Is it a zero?
One-ish. One-ish. So the only documentation we have of David outside of the Bible that occurs before. Now, I mean, if you count like Jesus' time, New Testament time, the Israelites are taught writing volumes and volumes all about David. But anything before the stories that are in the Hebrew Bible is this one stele. This is like the only thing that I think is not in the British Museum. This is they found this in 1993 at an archaeological dig in northern Israel. It's called the Tel Dan stele. So Dan, if you remember, is way up at the northern tip near Syria. And it's a Canaanite inscription from the 9th century, so 840, 800 BCE. So approximately 200 years after David would have lived. And it mentions several biblical kings. It talks about kings of the northern, kings of the south. It actually lines up very well with the stories that are in 1st and 2nd Kings, to kind of anchor them at the right time when those kings should have lived. So it's a really important, from a historical standpoint, it's a really important find because it kind of provides some really key anchors for the monarchy. But in this last, or not last, but near last line, it talks about the house of David. So that's it's not a reference necessarily to David himself, but it at least calls out his name as kind of the lineage of the kings of the southern. And you can see we're missing big chunks of it, so maybe there was more, I don't know. But that's all we have. So what we're left with then, if we want to do try to be as historically as possible, do a study historically as possible. I don't know, I'm having trouble with that word. Is we have to rely on the Hebrew Bible. We don't have anything for Saul. We don't have anything for David, other than this.
But
yes?
It doesn't mean it didn't happen because they just haven't found it.
It doesn't mean it didn't happen.
They didn't have that.
Correct. That's
So-
correct. They didn't have that.
So they're still digging.
That's right. That's right. And there are scholars who will say, there's a really well-known and very good scholar out of England, and her view is David is just like Moses or anybody else, or Joshua, a fictional character developed to kind of be the origin of Israel's history. Most scholars don't agree with that. Most scholars would say, no, I think there's enough historical evidence that supports, well, at least historical evidence in the Bible, in the Hebrew Bible. And when you're way back at Adam and Eve and Abraham, it's very fuzzy. Was there an Abraham? I don't know, maybe. I think the place where I feel comfortable saying I believe somebody was there was Moses. Moses makes sense to me. It's an Egyptian name in a Hebrew culture. That's weird. His wife was a Midianite, not a Hebrew. That's kind of weird. His father-in-law was a priest of Midian. And it's like, so scholars use these things when there's things in the text that don't really help the case or kind of anomalies. the probability of it being accurate is higher, because they kind of are like, Moses is there's a higher probability that Moses is a real person because it's complicated. It's a Egyptian name, as opposed to Joshua, which is a pretty standard Hebrew name. Was Joshua a real person? Maybe, maybe not. It's like us today saying John. Oh, our leader John. Well, that could have been anybody. But if you have our leader Shakir, that's kind of strange. Barack Obama versus Donald Trump. Thousands of years in the future, it's like they had a president named Barack. That's weird. Nobody's named Barack in the United States, but there's lots of Donalds and Johns and names like that. So, just kind of it just provides a little bit of clues. Those are some of the things that scholars use, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of those in the weeks to come.
Scott, were the Steelies like historical, like when they were kind of what we would see like our own history books today,
Right.
like in chronological order when they found those and those who might have that.
So
Artifacts.
yeah. In the ancient world, they were. This was kind of pre-paper. If they had paper, it was papyrus. But I think even papyrus was a later invention that started coming up. So they would write maybe on animal skins or carve things into stone. The problem with papyrus or animal skins is short shelf life. If you were going to save something, if you were a king and you were going to save something to show the world for the rest of the time to come that you were the greatest king ever, those documents will be gone. But if I carve it into a big stone, or put it on the side of a building, or put it on the side of a mountain, or a pillar out in the entrance to my kingdom, then everybody's going to read it when they come in to my kingdom, and they're going to know the stories about how great I am. So typically they're stones, engravings in stones that are either a single standing stone, a column, and they would put up into like in the city, or in the front of the palace, so that you would know how great the king is.
Could everybody read in those days?
Well, no. But usually there's somebody around who will tell you what it says. So there's also a lot of interpretation that goes on, I'm sure. So while we don't have any real evidence of David or Saul, there is quite a bit of archaeological evidence that kind of says that the basic cultural and political context of these stories is pretty accurate. We know that Philistine cities had come into the southern part of the Levant along the coast. We know that there were skirmishes between Israelites. They have found remains of battles where they had weaponry or whatever, where they had fought. You see Israelite pottery in with Philistine remains and vice versa. So there's kind of a pretty good feeling that there's enough archaeological evidence that this whole basic context of the stories that we're going to talk about today are pretty semi-accurate. So we're only going to talk about 1st and 2nd Samuel and when it comes to Saul and David. Not really modern history. What we'll see is that the stories definitely have a bit of a spin to them. So they are not, the writer, the Deuteronomistic historian, is not trying to sit down and write what we consider history with fact-checking everything. They have an agenda. They're putting out a religious text, and their agenda is to show certain things. So we've got to kind of keep that in mind. What's their agenda? And then we're going to go through the stories this week and next, and then we'll start kind of trying to excavate through the stories, looking for these anachronistic things, looking for elements that, what's going on here? What's going on there? And kind of put the spin aside and see if we can't come up with the real thing. Because what's the definition of spin, right? Spin is, everybody knows something happened, and you're trying to make it sound better than it was or different than it was, right? And so like back in the 90s and early 2000s, and the presidential candidates would have a debate, and then they go to the spin room, right? And everybody's like, oh, our guy was great. He did the best to know. When George Bush was looking at his watch, it really wasn't meant to be bored. It meant that he was, looking to have 4 more hours of debate, and all these things, right? So there's an agenda in these stories. We need to try to see what that agenda is and see if we can call out what the true story is. But today, I just want to kind of give you a background of the story of Saul, because it's a fascinating story and it's a fun story. And then we'll do the same thing for David. And then once we kind of get some of these key points in their lives and texts down, it'll be easier to kind of tease them all apart and see what happened. So in the book of Judges, it ends, the last verse of the book of Judges says, in those days, there was no king in Israel. All the people did what was right in their own eyes. So it's like everybody's just kind of doing their own thing. So in the first Samuel, Samuel gets called by God to become, they don't call it a judge, they call him a prophet, they call him a seer, but really he's functioning as, just like the previous book, the Judges, somebody getting raised up to kind of help run the tribes for now. And he does this for a while. And the first 6 or 7 chapters of 1 Samuel are stories of Samuel leading the people into battle and fighting with the Philistines and doing the stuff that a leader would do. And Samuel's got some sons, but they're rotten sons. They're not following in the way of God. They're making sacrifices to foreign gods and bringing foreign women in and having sex with them, and they're terrible. So God, pretty soon, as Samuel gets older, all the elders of Israel call him together, and they're like, dude, you're getting old. You're old. You're not going to be around forever. And your sons are worthless. You've grown old, and your sons have not followed in your ways. Therefore, appoint a king for us to govern us like all the other nations. Everybody else has a king. Why can't we have a king? We need a king. And Samuel was displeased. He was not happy about this. And so Samuel prays to the Lord, and Yahweh replies and says, heed the demand of the people in everything they say to you, for it is not you that they have rejected, it's me that they've rejected. It's me. Hi, I'm the problem. It's me. All the Taylor Swift fans, right? I read it. I was like, that's Taylor Swift right there. It's me. I'm the one they've rejected. And like everything else they have done, ever since I brought them out of Egypt, they've forsaken me. They worshiped other gods. And now they're doing it to you. So give them what they want. You'll want a king? Here's your king. And you enjoy, because kings are terrible. Kings suck. So Samuel goes out to find the king, and God says, I'm going to show you who to pick for the king, and you need to anoint them to be the king. Meanwhile, there's a guy from the tribe of Benjamin named Saul. He's the youngest son of his father, who's a wealthy Benjaminite. And one day, all their donkeys, their asses, run off. And so his father says, Saul, go find the asses. Saul's like, really? So he takes a servant, and they go out, and they look everywhere. They go all through the land of Benjamin, trying to find the donkeys, but they can't find them. And so finally, Saul's like, look, I'm just going home. And he's like, the donkeys are gone. If we stay out here for very long, we'll get eaten by wolves or lions or something. So we should go home too. But his servant says, hey, one last try. We got one more card to play here. There's a man of God who lives near here. This is Samuel. And apparently Saul doesn't know who Samuel is, so he can't be that popular. There's a man of God who lives in there, and he's highly esteemed. And everything he says comes true. Let's go there, and perhaps he'll he'll tell us about this errand on which we were set out. And Saul says, great idea, let's go. So they take off to where the man of God lives. Now the Lord had revealed the following to Samuel. I will send a man to you from the territory of Benjamin, and you shall anoint him ruler of my people Israel. He will deliver my people from the hands of the Philistines, for I have taken note of my people. Their outcry has come to me. Very similar wording, very echoes of what God said to Moses, right? I've heard the cries of my people, and I'm going to go take care of them. And as soon as Samuel saw Saul, the Lord declared to him, this is the guy I was telling you about. This is the one who's going to govern my people. And Samuel said to Saul, as for your asses that have strayed for 3 days ago, don't worry about them. They've been found, for it's you whom all of Israel has been yearning. And if not for you, and for whom is all of Israel yearning? It's kind of like Yoda talk. They put it backwards. Basically, you're the guy. You're the one everybody wants to be the king. And Saul says, what? I'm only a Benjaminite. Benjamin is the smallest tribe of all the tribes. Our clan is the least of all the clans. Why do you say these things to me? What's wrong with you? You've been into sacramental wine in the temple. But Samuel took a flask of oil and poured it over Saul's head and kissed him and said, the Lord anoints you ruler over his own people. And as Saul turned around to leave Samuel, God gave him another heart. This is really interesting. God gave him another heart, and the Spirit of God gripped Saul, and he spoke in ecstasy. So he became very ecstatic in his speech, very prophetic. That's what the prophets would do. They would get this message from God, and they would speak out to the people. So Saul's just kind of doing his thing, but then God comes upon him. And we'll see this a lot in the Old Testament, but really, it's really dramatic in Saul. God comes on you, and then God leaves. This idea we have of a ever-present God or the Holy Spirit that binds us all together, that is not a Hebrew Bible idea. That is a New Testament idea. The Hebrew Bible, God came, and then God left. So that was version 1 of Saul's calling. The next verse, we get a different story. Now Samuel summoned the people to the Lord, summoned the people to Mizpah and said to them, thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, I brought Israel out of Egypt. I delivered you from the hands of the Egyptians and of all the kingdoms that oppressed you. But today you have rejected your God who delivered you from all your troubles. For you have said, set up a king over us. Now get yourselves ready and stand by your tribes, and we're going to pick a king. Say, wait a minute, didn't you just anoint Saul the king? What's going on? And so Samuel brought forward each of the tribes of Israel, and the lot indicated the tribe of Benjamin. So again, they're casting lots. Yeah. Again, another thing, divine, in the Bible, even in the New Testament, they made decisions based on throwing the dice. Yep. And hopefully God was guiding those dice. Samuel brought forward each of the tribes, and the lot fell to Benjamin. Then Samuel brought forward the tribe of Benjamin and did the clans, and then ultimately the lot fell to Saul, the son of Kish. But when they looked around for him, they couldn't find him. He was there. He wasn't there. And so they inquired of the Lord again, and they were like, has anybody else come? We haven't got anybody. We need the king. It's somebody else. And the Lord said, yeah, he's hiding in the bags. I guess he brought his PlayStation and he was sitting back there. So they ran over and they found Saul and they drug him out from the baggage. And when he took his place among the people, he stood a head taller than all the rest of the people. And Samuel said to the people, do you see the one whom the Lord has chosen? There is none like him among all the people. And all the people acclaimed, long live the king.
Doesn't sound like a
Yeah. So it's interesting that God is going to pick out, and we're going to hear this story again when we get to David, but God's going to pick out a candidate, but it just happens that the candidate that he picks out is tall and strong and good looking and charismatic and can be a great leader. Why do we have two versions of the same story that are completely different? Guesses? This is gossip? Yeah. No, this is evidence of sources. There are two different traditions out there. When the writers of this, when they're compiling the final version of this, there's two different sets of stories. One set of stories says, Saul, that King Saul, he was hanging out in the baggage. Nobody could find him. He didn't want to be the king. They had to drag him over to assume as king. The other version was he's just a farm boy. He was out looking for his donkeys, and he ran into Samuel, and Samuel anointed him king. Two different stories, two different traditions that have been woven together. What's nice about the writers of the Hebrew Bible, or I should say the editors of the Hebrew Bible, is that they respected all the different traditions. And they didn't want to pick one over the other, so they would just bring them in together. That's really nice. The frustrating part is they put them right next to each other and make it sound like it's in chronological order. They didn't say, now another story. There's another story. They try to weave it all into one. So you have to look. So every time you see these are called doublets. Sometimes you see them and they're called triplets, and they're all throughout the Old Testament. They're in Genesis, they're in Exodus, they're in the books of Samuel and Kings. Anytime you see two stories that are very, very similar, that don't make sense to be together, that's the evidence of two different sources.
Question.
Yes.
Why do you think that the editors, didn't ever point out that these are two, this is the first account, this is the second?
Boy, I have no idea. That's a great PhD thesis. You should go back. I don't really know. They seem to be wanting to try to tell a continuous tale, but they don't want to get rid of the various sources. So they just kind of put them next to each other. There's really not a good answer for why. The interesting part is when there's two things where it's like conceivable, it's conceivable that Saul ran into Samuel, he anoints him, and then he goes and they have this big thing and Saul's hiding in the baggage. But when you get to the flood, like in Genesis, the flood story, there's only going to be one flood. You can't have two global floods. So there they take the verses and they weave them together into a single story. But most of the rest of the time, other than the flood story is the only one that I can think of, they just set them right side by side. And it's just what they did. I'm not sure why.
And aren't they speaking to different cultures that are coming together, so they want to appeal to the different cultures in a way?
Possibly. I mean, this is being edited together much later. This is not contemporaneous with the story that's being told. So they're taking stories from the time of these kings 400 years later during the Babylonian exile and bringing them into a story. So maybe you had Northern Kingdom traditions and Southern Kingdom traditions, and they're having to mix them together. A lot of scholars think that's what happened in the exile, and why they get brought together like this is in the Northern Kingdom you had one set of traditions, and in the Southern Kingdom you had another. And through the Assyrian invasion and the exile, and what we know for fact that the Babylonians would take all the learned people, the leaders, and they would mix them all up with other people. So they're trying to dilute. They didn't want them all to be together and create this little band of power. So they would try to dilute them into the population. And what that does is all of a sudden there's like this new guy, and he's like, what story is that? I never heard that story about King David. That's not the story we grew up with. My story was different. And then they would tell their story. So it's a little bit of maybe trying to appeal to all the different cultures, all the different tribes, respecting the traditions, not wanting to throw anything out. Okay. So Saul turns out to be a great king for a while. He does everything he's supposed to. He's tall, he's handsome, he leads Israel into battle, he kills lots of Philistines. That's exactly what we need our king to do. Lead us into battle. But there's a problem, or eventually there becomes a problem. So the Philistines were on the attack. And so Samuel tells Saul, hey, go to the mountain of Gilgal. The Philistines are there. I'll be there in 7 days. Amass all the troops. And when I get there, we'll do the sacrifice to the Lord. And then you can go and win the battle and deliver Israel. So Saul says, great idea. So Saul goes and calls all the troops together. So you see, it's not, I didn't put it in this text, but in the text, in the verses before, he has to send out the call to Israel. Very still tribal, he doesn't have his own standing army under his control. But when Saul calls, everybody's like, okay.
Like a militia?
Yeah, kind of like a militia. Hey, I need all your militias, I need all your people. They gather them all together. And so they all get together and they wait for 7 days, the time that Samuel had set. But Samuel didn't show up. And then after a few more days, the people are like, well, screw this, I'm going back home. If we're not going to go fight anybody, I'm just going to go back home. And so they started to leave. And Saul said, okay, wait, time out. Bring me, I'm the king, bring me the burnt offerings and the sacrifice of well-being. And he presented the sacrifice to the Lord, just like he was supposed to do, just like Israel was supposed to do. And just when he finished presenting the burnt offering, who shows up but Samuel? And Samuel says, what have you done? Oh my God. And Samuel's, what have you done? And Saul said, everybody was leaving. We have to attack. And if we don't, we're not going to be able to defeat the Philistines. They were preparing to attack us. I thought they would march down against me at Gilgal before I had entreated the Lord. So I forced myself. I didn't want to do it, but I had to do it. I forced myself to offer the burnt offering. And Samuel answered Saul and says, you have acted foolishly. Again, very Yoda-like, if you're a Star Wars fan. You have acted foolishly in not keeping the commandments that your Lord your God laid upon you. The Lord would have established your dynasty forever, but now your dynasty will not endure. The Lord will seek out a man after his own heart, and the Lord will appoint him ruler over his people, because you did not abide by what the Lord had commanded you. So Saul did what a king should do, took command. Samuel was like, nope. God was like, nope, you're out. Sounds kind of petty to me, personally, but that's the story that we have. And then we have another one that's different. So the next text, Samuel says to Saul, hey, thus says the Lord, I'm exacting the penalty for what Amalek did to Israel. I can't remember what they did, but somewhere in the previous books or chapters, the Amalekites had done something bad. Go and attack the Amalekites and prescribe all that belongs to him. Right? Remember the prescription? We're going to destroy everything. Spare no one. Kill all the men and all the women and all the infants and the sucklings and the ox and the sheep and the camels and the asses. Nothing shall be left. So Saul mustered the troops and advanced as far as the city of Amalek, and he destroyed the Amalek from, basically he wiped them all out. I can't even pronounce those names. And he captured King Agag of the Amalekites alive. He prescribed all the people. I didn't do a very good job with my editing here, did I? He prescribed all the people, putting them to the sword. But Saul and the troops spared the king and the best of the sheep and the best of the oxes, and they split it among themselves. That's what the rest says that you can't see on the... Oh, there we go. He put them all to the sword, spared Agag, kept the screen. He would not prescribe them. They prescribed only what was cheap and worthless. which was all the people, all the regular people, and the women. So there's that. And the word of the Lord came to Samuel, I regret that I made Saul king, for he has turned away from me and has not carried out my commandments. So here, again, two different sources, two different stories. One story is Saul was getting ready to attack the Philistines and took on a religious role, offered the offering, which is a no-no. And then the other one is he didn't follow God's orders because he wouldn't destroy everything. He only destroyed some of the things.
But he was doing the same thing in a way because it was an unclean, right? He was deciding what was...
He was deciding, right. He had put himself over Samuel and God. That's what the story says. Yes. And again, just remember, we're reading a story that's designed to tell us something. So what is it? We can kind of already tell. Saul was a good king, but then he took it, just like you said, he took it on himself and he lost favor with God. So unbeknownst to Saul, Samuel goes and anoints a new king, David. And we'll talk about David next week. But David's only a king in waiting. He gets anointed, but he never mentions it to anybody. And in the meantime, Saul's world starts collapsing around him. The Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord began to terrify him. So again, in the Hebrew Bible, there's not this idea of an evil force in the world. So we have a very dualistic picture, good versus evil, God versus Satan, angels of light versus the demons of darkness, right? All of that. That's a dualistic worldview. It's a very Greek worldview, not a Hebrew worldview. In the Hebrew world, and in most of the ancient outside of Greece, that was really that Greco idea of dualistic thinking is very, very different than what, it was revolutionary in its time, because it was like, that's not what most of the people thought. What most of the people thought was whoever your God was in charge of everything. You did good things, you got blessed. If you did bad things, you got punished. And then sometimes you did bad things and you didn't get punished. And so then it's like, well, why did that happen? And then people would come up with all sorts of crazy ideas as to why that didn't happen, as we shall see. So the Spirit of the Lord, an evil spirit from the Lord began to terrify him. And Saul's courtier said to him, an evil spirit is terrifying you. Let us look for someone who is skilled at playing the lyre. And when the evil spirit of God comes over you, he will play it, the lyre, and you'll feel better. I've heard there's a lot of scholarship of people talking about whether Saul may have had like a brain aneurysm or migraines, because over and over throughout the story from this point on, Saul gets these horrible moods that just descend upon him, and nothing can console him, and he makes bad decisions and lashes out, which I think is really interesting. That could be could be a story that has some historical context. He did suffer from some kind of malady. They didn't know what it was. For them, for the ancient Israelites, it was an evil spirit from the Lord.
Does it sound kind of bipolar?
Maybe something like that. I mean, it could be. To me, that's my thought, is that the historical. Again, we look for little bits of historicity. There was some kind of condition that Saul had that caused all of this, and it kind of they couldn't get away from that. They all knew that he had these fits, so they can't deny it. So they have to write around it and explain it. And their explanation is, he has done bad things, the Lord is punishing him, and the Lord is sending these evil spirits.
Well, I'm wondering why God chose these people that weren't going to work out.
Well,
I mean, he must.
that's right. Well, the question is, did God choose them? Or is that just the story that we have, is that God chose them?
Sounds more like
And I think what we see when we'll get through the story of David, and then we start unstitching it. And I think what you'll find is who all has a good view of David? Who all sees David as a man after God's own heart?
I mean, I love David.
Yeah.
Because he's fallible, and it
Yeah.
makes me feel good
Yeah,
about myself.
Yeah. It's good. We will find that he's extremely fallible. Even more fallible than probably what we think. So David came to Saul and entered into his service, and Saul took a strong liking to him and made him one of his arms bearers. We'll come back to this story next week when we talk about David, because this is, again, one of the classic examples of two different versions of the story that get woven together. But for our story, we're just going to kind of stick with David. So David kills Goliath. He gets into favor. I have a mistake here. I realized it this morning. I didn't have time to do it. He wants to marry Saul's daughter, but that comes a little later. David is best friends with Saul's son Jonathan, but the problem starts happening as they come back into Jerusalem after being out in the troops. The troops came home. David returned from killing the Philistines, and the women of all the towns of Israel came out singing and dancing to greet King Saul with timbrels and shouting. And the women sang as they danced, "Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands." So, but Saul's the king, and David's just this underling. I realized this morning I got this out of order. So Saul is like, he's trying to at first he has a liking for David, but after a while he sees him as a threat. Saul was much distressed and greatly vexed, for he said, "To David they have given tens of thousands, and to me they have only given thousands. All that he lacks is the crown, and he would be the king." So he knows what's going on. So Saul kept a jealous eye on David. One day, an evil spirit of God gripped Saul as David was playing the lyre, and Saul picked up his spear and threw it, trying to pin David to the wall. Saul was afraid of David, for the Lord was with him, and he had turned away from Saul. So Saul appointed him chief of 1,000 soldiers to march at the head of the troops. Now, in ancient warfare, being at the head of the troops was not a great place to be. Basically, in the old days, they all come marching in the field, and whoever's in the first front lines, they get wiped out. And this was Saul trying to get rid of David. I'm going to put him up in the front as he goes into battle, and then the Philistines will just kill him, and I'll be finished.
Wasn't that what David did to you?
That's exactly right, yeah. That's exactly what David did to Uzziah. And it doesn't work either time. They can't seem to, well, I think it did work for Uzziah. But for David, he's too great of a warrior. This is the story where how David gets married to Saul's daughter, Michal. So Saul says, okay, you've proven yourself as a warrior, I'll let you marry my daughter, but for a dowry, I want 100 Philistine foreskins.
Yeah.
Now, the Philistines probably would not just offer up their foreskins. Sure, David, whatever you want. I'll give them to you. And you can't buy them at Publix. They're just like... So the idea is David's got to go not only kill 100 Philistines, he's probably got to kill more Philistines, and then he's got to cut off the foreskins and bring them back. So Saul's like, surely this will get rid of David. But again, David shows up with a bag full of foreskins and says, here you go, pops. And Saul has already committed that he has to marry his daughter, so David marries Michal. And she and Jonathan, Saul's son, heir to the throne, will not turn on David. In fact, there's a famous story where Saul sends the troops to David's house to try to kill David. And Michal, his wife, he takes out the back window. He gets word of it and runs, and Michal goes and gets one of the household idols, puts it in the bed, kind of a Ferris Bueller-y kind of thing, puts some hay and covers it up, and the people thought he was in there sleeping, and it delayed the troops long enough, Saul's troops long enough for David to get away. Which is interesting. Why does David, a man after God's own heart, have idols in his house? I think everybody had idols in their house. A little window. Okay, so time goes on, and when he sees that he's afraid of David. So Saul becomes increasingly, what time is it? How am I doing on time? 11. All right, I'll be done in 5-ish minutes. So Saul becomes increasingly fixated on David. He tries to get Jonathan and Michal to turn on David, but they won't do it. He chases them all around Israel, trying to kill him. He eventually begins pursuing them throughout the kingdom. David continues to elude Saul, but he won't fight Saul. David refuses in the text to fight Saul. Even when Saul shows up in the cave, David's hiding in a cave. Saul shows up to use the restroom, and David could have killed him, but he doesn't do it. And he cuts off a part of Saul's cloak, which I don't know about you, but if you're in the bathroom and someone's like with a knife cutting off part of your cloak, I think you would notice that. And then he goes out and proclaims it to all of Israel. See, I could have killed you and I didn't do it. I don't have a beef with you. Why are you trying to kill me? But eventually, Saul gets faced with a national crisis. The Philistines are back. They're invading, and he has to go defend Israel. But God is not with him. Samuel recently passed away, so Samuel can't advise him. God won't talk to him. He doesn't know what to do. So what do you do? This is just the story. So Samuel had died, and all Israel made lament for him. Saul gathered all of Israel, but when Saul saw the Philistine force, his heart trembled with fear. And Saul inquired of the Lord, but the Lord did not answer him, either by dreams or by oracle or by the prophets. So he couldn't get any kind of an answer. So Saul, being a clever guy, said, find me a woman who consults ghosts so that I can go to her and inquire through her and find out. And his courtiers told her that there was a witch in Endor who consulted ghosts. So Saul disguises himself, puts on different clothes, sets out with 2 men. They come to the woman by night, and he says, divine for me a ghost, bring up the one I shall name to you. The woman says, who do you want me to get? And Saul says, Samuel. I want Samuel. Now again, remember, in the Hebrew world, in the ancient world, when you died, you didn't go to heaven or hell, you went to Sheol, which is just kind of a place where you sleep. It's like you're asleep. It's not punishment. It's just sleep. So she calls him up, recognizes Samuel. She says, I see a divine being coming up from the earth. It's an old man, and he's wrapped in a robe. And I see him like putting on his bathrobe, It's like, what, like when you wake up in the morning, you're like, what the heck? Why am I up so early? And Saul knew it was Samuel, and he bowed low with his face to the ground. And Samuel says, why have you disturbed me? What the heck is going on? The ghost of Samuel. And Saul answered, I'm in great trouble. The Philistines are attacking. God has turned away from me. I've called you to tell me what to do. So you see here, Saul is completely powerless at this point in his kingship. And Samuel says, why do you ask me, seeing that the Lord has turned away from you? The Lord has torn the kingship out of your hands and given it to David because you did not obey the Lord. And the Lord will deliver the Israelites who are with you into the hands of the Philistines, and tomorrow you and your sons will lie with me. So he's basically like, you're going to die tomorrow. That's just the way it goes. So Saul flung himself onto the ground, terrified by Samuel's words. These stories that are Saul and a dead Samuel and a witch are hard to kind of treat as historical. But what they do is they set for the reader, this is designed for the reader to say, Saul's not worthy of being king. It's recapping, in case you missed it, for the last 18 or 19 chapters, Saul's not worthy to be king. Yeah, now he's gonna die, and David's gonna take over. So Saul and his 3 sons, his arm bearer, as well as all his men, died together that next day. And the men of Israel on the other side of the valley and on the side of the Jordan, when they saw that the men of Israel had fled and that Saul and his sons were dead, they abandoned the towns and fled, and the Philistines came and occupied them. And this is pretty typical of what the archaeology says is these little border skirmishes. The Philistines never conquered Israel, and Israel never conquered the Philistines. But they had these little border skirmishes. So if you were unlucky enough to live in a little town, it kept swinging back and forth, between the Philistines. And that is well documented in the historical record. So you get little bits of this mixed in here. I thought I had one more slide. Anyway, Saul sees that everybody's coming. He's fighting the battle. The Philistines are coming. He gets hit by the archers. What happened to my other slide? Oh no, I lost the slide, sorry. So he gets shot by all the Philistine archers. He can't even stand up. And he says to his arms bearer, hey, they're going to come and they're just going to abuse me because I'm the king. Run me through, kill me now so that they can't, they can't just torture me or make a show of it. And his arms bearer is like, no way, I'm never going to do that to you. You're my king. I'm going to be here to defend you forever. So Saul takes his sword and he falls on his sword, commits suicide. His arms bearer, seeing that Saul has killed himself, takes his sword and kills himself, and that's the end of Saul. Happy story for Sunday. So it's important, again, this is all the biblical text. Next week we'll do the same treatment for David, walk through kind of the story, because it's important to know, it's important to know the stories to be able to, in the pieces of the stories, to start unsplicing them to see what the actual historical something might have been. All right, have a great week. Enjoy. See you all next week.